Radicchio is a crop that is grown all over the year thanks to its genetics and all the works that was done in the last 70 years. In the beginning, there was just one variety that was seeded and planted in August, at our latitude, I mean, and that was ready to be harvested in March. So a very late variety. The plant had a very open habit, and it had not the ability of heading. For this fact, the growers were used to put some land on it to press and help the plant to head. Selecting by selecting, year by year, they were able to divide the crop in different cycles and to get the possibility of grow it even in spring, so with winter plantings and spring harvesting. So exactly the opposite of what the crop was at the beginning. So planting in August with short day and the winter that was coming, so the decrease of temperature. Otherwise, in spring, we have long light and the temperature that gets warmer. This was possible to the very big variability in terms of genetic population that was already present in the crop. When we talk about leaf chicories, the modern cultivated radicchios, we have many, what we say, types. So they have the name of the place in Veneto region where they were bred and they are popular. For example, the red round type, so Rosso di Chioggia, that is the most popular, even because it's used in ready-to-eat bags salad, and also because it's the best yielding in terms of weight. Then we have Treviso Precoce, that is the second most popular. And then we have other types like Verona, that is again a red type, and other two variegato types, so the creamy yellow leaf with the red dots like Castelfranco or Lusia, that again are both two places here in Veneto region. So the early types that are characterized by a small amount of days from transplanting to harvesting, so from 50 to 65, 70 days. The medium types that are the 90 days from transplanting for more or less November harvesting, and the late types that starts with the December harvesting varieties, so 110 days to February 160, 180 days. This is mainly for Chioggia and for Verona and Castelfranco. For Treviso is the most sensible to frost due to his shape that is long, so its top can be affected most from the frost and it can get damaged, so we get varieties that can be harvested mainly until January. There is a fourth group that are the varieties that are suitable to be grown in spring, that are a completely different group. Sometimes you can use early varieties, but the best result you can get with varieties that were bred specifically for spring harvesting. A good rule could be to start with the longer cycle varieties, so 75 days with the February plantings, and then going ahead with shorter days, because the time when they are maturing, the temperature is warmer and the daylight is longer, so you need a shorter variety, shorter cycle variety. So for the fourth group, you have to do the opposite of what you are used to do in summer. So you start planting the longer cycles variety in terms of the medium. So, for example, you start in planting in February the 75 days varieties, and you go again in March with the earlier varieties, so 75 days, 55 and 50 probably. And remember that you have to protect these plantings, probably with some plastic, or at least with some row cover. It depends on the weather you have in your area. For that particular cropping, you need to grow them mainly in sandy soil if possible, because it's easier to work on it even in winter, because even if it's wet, you can go inside the field and don't damage the land, and you can also build some protecting structures easier rather than in clay soil. For what concerns planting techniques, we have two. You can direct seed or planting. In terms of planting, remember that from sowing to planting, you have to get your seedling in no more than 30 days, both in summer and in spring as well. So if you get some seedling in spring, remember to heat the greenhouse where you are producing the seedling. Otherwise, the risk of a crop failure in terms of bolting, for example, will be maximum. So don't exceed this term of 30 days. In summer as well, if you have, for example, 3 ideal transplanting times, one for the early varieties, one for the medium, and one for the late, don't seed at the same time and then split the plantings, but calculate the seeding time at most 30 days before your planting date you decided. Otherwise, again, an old plant could be more, could be easier that bolts. For what concerns direct seed, it's an old technique that consumes a lot of seed but allows you to save money of seedling production and labor cost of planting. Even if you have to consider it have to be thinned in the field, because you will have 3 times or 5 times the plants that have to be housed for a correct cropping. So you have to recreate the correct spacing on the row, just killing the extra plants. You do that after 1 month from seeding. You need a good availability of irrigation, because at the beginning the chicory seed is a super small one and need a lot of helps with irrigation to germinate. And remember that an important thing is that early and medium variety are not suitable for direct seed, because but late one, yes, they are, because they could germinate in 1 week or 10 days, and this difference amongst the seedling that will come up from the ground, you can balance it with a long cycle, because it's long enough for the plants that germinate later to complete the cycle. Otherwise, for a very short cycle varieties, it's impossible. And when you go to harvest, you will have many stages of plants. So one that is ready, one that is over mature, and some that are ready for be harvested at that time. So it's a good technique for late varieties, but not for medium and for earlier. Talking about plant spacing, we can talk about a distance between rows of 40 or 45 centimeters. And for early varieties, I would suggest 27 centimeters on the row. That means more or less 8 plants per square meters. When we switch to medium to late varieties, so from the November harvesting varieties, we should switch a distance on the row of 31 centimeters. That will mean 7 plants per square meters. This is because medium and late plants are more vigorous and needs more space for all their outer leaves to be housed in the field and not to get competition between plants. For the very, very early varieties, I mean September harvesting, or for the fourth group, spring cropping varieties, you can put more plants per square meter till 10. This is because the plants are smaller, and to get a reasonable yield, you should increase the number of plants per square meter and get a good yield. For the field preparation, you need deep preparation, if possible not plowing, but just using a ripper. In terms of crop rotation, it's better not to go on the same field with chicory for 4 years, and if possible, always after wheat or other winter cereals. If possible, throwing away the straw, because it uses a lot of nitrogen to be destroyed, and it's not good for the crop because it's a crop that loves nitrogen and needs it to grow. Okay, for the soil preparation, we do a deep ripper, and then we do stale bedding. Usually we prepare the soil fine, and then we water it, wait that the weeds come up, and re-prepare with a rotary plow just immediately before planting. I mean, few minutes before. In this way, the soil maintains the right moisture to host the plants, and it gives you the possibility of irrigate in the evening after one full day of planting. To do that, the trays that host the plants have to be super wet because the peat have to maintain the right moisture to keep the plant alive for a whole day of planting. This is a super important fact, because if the peat dries, it doesn't have the ability to rehydrate, and if you came in a field that had this type of problem, so that the peat came dry during the planting, if you came in November, for example, so after 3 months, the plants will be the same size when you planted. So they are not able to produce roots and to explore new land and go ahead with the growing. In terms of fertilizer, usually you can put some organic pelleted fertilizer just before preparing the soil before planting. Plus, after 1 month from the planting, when you need to cultivate between rows to weed the field, you can distribute again such an amount of fertilizer, again organic pelleted, that is with a title in nitrogen from 8 to 10. At the beginning, it's important. At the beginning, I mean the first month, when you care about the rooting process, it's important to give phosphorus. And in the last 2 weeks before harvesting, when you see that the crop is turning from the vegetative process to completing the cycle, coming ready for harvesting, you have to be able to give some potassium that will help you with color, because we grow radicchio because it's red, so we need red leaves, and helps you to form a firm head, well overwrapped and closed and firm. For the last phase, when you have to give potassium to the crop, I'm talking about foliar spray, so liquid fertilizer, that can be applied from 1 to 3 times in the 2 weeks before harvesting. The rate of phosphorus that helps the rooting process at the beginning, in the first month, can be from 30 to 60. One of the most important elements in growing radicchio is nitrogen. It helps you at the beginning in destroying the straw that you have in the field from the previous crop, and stimulate the plant growing even at the beginning and along the whole cycle. But it has to be managed very carefully for many reasons. One of that is that if you use too much, the plant will develop a lot and will express all its strength till bolting, even if it's not the bolting season. The second reason is that promotes the bitter taste. So if you exceed too much with nitrogen, you will get a too bitter plant. And another important reason is that it causes rotten leaves, because it allows you to get very big plants with big leaves, but you got them thanks to the fact that it promotes the increasing in terms of size of the cells. So you will obtain a big surface made by a small amount of very big cells. And when one of these cells gets damaged, will cause a big rotten part in the leaf. Otherwise, if the plant grows slower, you are going to get a similar surface, I would say almost the same, but that is compounded by a high number of small cells that when gets damaged, the damage you can see in terms of rotten part of the leaf is very small. So it's useful, but manage it carefully. Talking about nitrogen application, you can applicate it the first time when you were preparing the soil for planting, mixing it in the first layer, in the first 20 centimeters of the field with the rotary plow, and then you can applicate a second time for the early variety, side dressing the field, and if possible, and if the crop needs it, you can apply a second time for the late varieties, if they allows you to come in the field in terms of side of autumn leaves. You don't have to damage it distributing the fertilizer. To understand if the plant needs a second application of nitrogen, you have to check the color. That, for example, if it's yellowish, it means a lack of nitrogen, and you can see the strength of the plant, I mean the vigor. If the autumn leaves are upright, they don't need any nitrogen because it's enough. If they are flat, it would mean that it needs some nitrogen, and you can applicate it. Radicchio is a fall-winter crop, and it is thanks to its ability of affording the cold temperatures and frost. This comes mainly from the medium cycle varieties, so 90 days varieties from transplanting to harvesting. The ability of affording frost is related to the weather that we get in the period of the year that the variety is suitable to be harvested for. So if we have some frost in the morning in November, it would mean that the November harvesting variety are able to afford a small amount of frost. The October one, none. And going ahead in the season, so the December harvesting varieties will have more ability of frost resistance in comparison with the November one, and less to the January one, that once again will have less than the February one. This ability is related to storage ability, because we make the plant experience the same situation of the field in the cold storage. So the ability of be stored is related to the cycle. The very long cycle varieties are the most suitable for cold storage, and going less when we use a shorter cycle variety. The early variety, I mean 50 to 70, 80 days from transplanting, and the spring one are not suitable for cold storage. Just a quick storage, at most 30 days, that allows you to manage the harvesting, and a quick storage that is useful to arrange the sales. In terms of temperatures, again, the November harvesting varieties can afford few hours of temperature, a few degrees below 0 Celsius, -1, -2. So the very first frost you have in November in the morning, no more. The December harvesting varieties can afford a strong frost for few days. So what you have here in December, and the January and February harvesting varieties are the most frost resistant, that can go until few degrees below 0, -5, -6. For many days, we have frost every day, all the night and good part of the morning, all January and a part of February. A very important thing is that the plant have not to be ready for harvesting to show a good tolerance of frost. If it gets frost when it's firm and ready to be harvested, the frost will come from the outer leaves to the core and will damage the whole head. And another very important thing to preserve from damage the plant is not to touch it when it's frost. Otherwise, you will see on the leaf the sign of your fingers. So in winter, you can harvest it just from the last part of the morning, or I would say in the afternoon, when it's the frost. Sometimes, if you want to start harvesting already in the morning, you can cover the part of the field you plan to harvest in one day, just the day before, with row cover, to avoid to get frost plants in the morning, and you can touch them already from the beginning of your working day. Or just for Castelfranco types and Treviso Tardivo types, you can cover them for the last month. For example, a January harvesting varieties that is ready, but that you want to bring until February for harvesting, you can leave it in the field and cover for the last 3 weeks, for example, again with row cover. And you can find a fresh plant in February, 1 month later, the period that it should be harvested, so January. When you have to harvest the plant for fresh market that have to be sold immediately after harvesting, you have to harvest firm head that are ready for the commercial maturity to get the best yield from the field. Otherwise, if you are planning to make some cold storage, you have to manage the whole field for that purpose. So with a lower distribution of nitrogen, due to the fact it promotes rotten, and also harvesting before the commercial maturity. The head have to be firm, but not like stone, and more or less for winter varieties from 2 to 3 weeks before the right harvest maturity. The midrib have to be still green, the plant have to be a little bit soft, and I would say lack the last 20% to maturity. You have to harvest it leaving some more outer leaves that can be thrown out in the second process of cleaning it after the storage, and leaving 1 centimeter of root that helps the plant not to dry too much during the process of storing, and also give the enough strength to the plant to complete the cycle in the storage, allowing the midrib to become completely white and getting firmer heads. Going deep in the differences between types, for example, let's talk about Treviso. We have to mention that it's less efficient in using nitrogen. To avoid not to get it ready when we expect it in terms of days from plantings, one tip could be to plant it a little bit earlier. If we know the right day for a Chioggia of the same cycle, plant Treviso 5 days before. The other tip is to give more nitrogen because it needs some more. For what concerns, for example, Lucia type, it's a soft type. The head doesn't have to be compact like the Chioggia, for example, even because sometimes we want to pretend it's Castelfranco and we want to open it. This is mainly for the super early varieties, when we can get there with Castelfranco, where it's difficult to get super early varieties, and we can use Lucia to do that. It's important to maintain this ability to be opened at the beginning of the season of the variegated. Castelfranco, again, is a soft type, have to be opened to be sold, so we have also here to maintain the ability to do that. And for these two types, the variegated, it's important to remember that they are ready when the base color of the leaves turns from green to creamy yellow. Pink radicchio. We don't know if it comes from the Verona type or the white Mantovana type. At the moment, it's present just like late varieties. There is some variability inside the type. We are trying to get earlier variety, selecting them year by year, always trying to push the variety in selecting the earlier plants. The color comes the same way of the red, so we have a green base, yellowish green at the beginning, that turns to pink with the cold, so it's stimulated like anthocyans, like the red, by cold temperatures. Late cycle varieties are suitable for storage because the same process they afford in the fridge is what they would afford in the field, so they are selected for it. To do that, you have to manage the field for that purpose, so applying a lower content of fertilizer, nitrogen, during the whole cycle. You have to harvest them when the plant is dry, so if possible in the afternoon, because the humidity you bring to the cell is not good for storage. You have to leave some autumn leaves that will be thrown out during the cleaning process after storing, and leaving 1.5 centimeter of root that will give the strength to the plant to complete the cycle in the storage to get white midrib, because it was green as you harvested it when the plant was not ready, and will allow the plant not to dry too much during the storing process. The cellar that you use for storing, that are filled one time and empty at the end of the process. You don't have to open the door many times during the process. Otherwise, the condition changes for a while and you will have bad results at the end. The temperature on the core of the plant is minus 0.5 degrees. So the plants are almost frost, but they can afford it, so no problem. Remember to throw them out the cellar a couple of days before working them, because they have to defrost. Otherwise, you will damage the leaves. The right stage of the plant for storing when you harvest it is not fully mature. It's more or less 20% before the commercial maturity, so more or less 2 weeks to 20 days before it. So for example, a January harvesting variety have to be harvested in mid-December, and it can be stored in this way even for 4 months. When you throw out the plants from the cellar and they get defrost, you have to put them in water and submerge them for at least 2 hours. It helps to rehydrate the plants that are a little bit dried from the process of storing. Then you can start cleaning them to throw out the leaves that are rotten or dry to get fresh core. And you have to do a new cut of the root, throwing away the extra part, just leaving the fresh cut that should be white and not oxidate. To prevent the oxidation of the new cut, and also to maintain the midrib super white, some growers add some citric acid in the tankers of the washing water, and it has not any consequence on the food. One problem you can experience is the internal burn. It could be caused by two facts. One is the lack of calcium, mainly in sandy soils. The other one is too warm weather in the middle of the cycle of the plant. For example, for a December harvesting variety, if you have a too warm October, you can experience internal burn. Or it can also be caused by the mix of the two facts I already mentioned. And it appears like a perfect plant that have rotten leaves after the 2 or 3 external leaves that appears perfect. Even if it looks like Radicchio has a super specific growing conditions, adapting transplanting date and using the right variety, it can be grown in different places. Remember that the earliest varieties can be managed like lettuce, so you can organize multiple plantings of the same variety for the most of the season, mainly on southern latitudes. And then the medium and the late one, you have to be more precise in planting dates. Adjusting the transplanting dates to the place where you are growing in most of the part of the world, it can be grown almost all over the year. I hope all the information we gave in this video will inspire you and suggest you to grow Radicchio all over the world, wherever you come from. Thank you for watching.